Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Yes. So, my name is Paulette Carr, and I'd like to welcome you to this session on MIL to build smart, secure, resilient, tolerant, socially inclusive, and sustainable development cities. While it may appear that we have greater expectation of media and information literacy than is realistic, I think, based on what we are expecting MIL to do, we have a very strong panel this morning who will share their perspective on different aspects of the theme. Can MIL really build smart cities? And what are the challenges? In a few sessions yesterday, clear lines of demarcation were drawn between MIL cities and smart cities. Today, we have a large panel who will probably try to clear up some of those differences. We have 6 presentations, including mine, because I'm also a presenter. And we have, firstly, I'm going to invite our keynote speaker, Mr. Paul Mijs from the USA, the associate professor at Emerson College, who will speak. And then we will have our panelists speak for 10 minutes each. And I'm going to ask you all to make note of your questions, because our question session will come after at the end of the presentations. So welcome again to this session, and we look forward to having a very rewarding time. So we'll have Mr.
In Geddes, Lithuania, at the UNESCO Feature Conference on Media and Information Literacy. My name is Paul Mijs, and I am a professor of civic media and journalism at Emerson College in Boston, Massachusetts, and I am sending a quick note today, wishing you a wonderful conference and a wonderful few days together, sharing ideas, sharing information and research, and connecting in dialogue in this very important week for media literacy around the world. I apologize I can't be with you. Certain last-minute travel issues prevented me from coming, but I'm happy that I can at least share this note with you and spend a few minutes to talk about my newest book project and some of the research that informed that, in the hopes that it might spark some new ideas and some new project and some of the research that informed that, in the hopes that it might spark some new ideas or some new inquiry, or engage or embrace you in some thought and reflection that might not have occurred before. I'm happy to follow up more on this new book project. It's just been released. It's about a month out. Or to engage with you in dialogue after this if you'd like to send over information. Please find me and look me up. So the newest project that I've been asked to speak about is a book called Civic Media Literacies: Reimagining Human Connection in an Age of Digital Abundance. And this book departs from the main question that I realized as I had been engaging in local community efforts and local community activism around what is the civic value of media literacy? How does media literacy impact civic engagement? Oftentimes in our definitions and frameworks for media literacy, we loosely connect skills of access and evaluation and analysis and reflection and action and production with increased civic efficacy. But oftentimes we don't really understand what civic efficacy looks like or feels like, or what increased civic efficacy means. So my book starts off with this premise of media literacy's civic problem. The idea that we have all these skill sets that we prioritize, but then we don't try to connect them to civic well-being or to civic inquiry or efficacy. And furthermore, that in a digital culture, this becomes a harder proposition for us. Where I mentioned that media literacy is increasingly seen as a solution or response to current trends in digital culture around fake news and sensationalism and silos and social networks. Well, really, I identified two major movements that are happening in the digital cultural landscape. The first is that of spectacle, which is that sensationalized information, spectacular information that is shared by young people for young people with no oversight, is now normalized on the web, and it's spread on the web and it's perpetuated on the web, and you don't need big media systems to normalize spectacle. Second term is distrust, saying that media outlets are less trusted now than they have ever been, and that's largely because the platforms that people get most information in have certain algorithms that prioritize and promote certain information at the behest of others. So because of this, the work that we see in media literacy as a skill set comes into question, because these skills don't do anything to address a spectacle culture or an infrastructure of distrust. And so therefore, in my book, I went about doing research with young people to find out how these young people who are engaged in media literacy experiences, to find out how their experiences shaped, or how their skill attainment shaped their ability to participate and engage civically in the world. And what I found through my research was that young people who have these skills and who have gained adequate understanding of media systems and structures still could not envision a pathway to civic participation or engagement. It was very hard for them to do that, and there were some certain constraints involved. So I used that research to kind of talk about what happens if we take the media literacy space and reimagine it to prioritize what I call civic intentionality, which is the idea that media literacy should be about bringing people together in the world towards a common good, and that the more human this is, the more connected people will be. So in this chapter on reimagining media literacy, I presented a framework that says all media interventions should have these core skill sets, but before these skill sets, they should be designed in the context of some value sets. And the values I put forward are a value of caring, a value of critical consciousness, a value of imagination, a value of persistence, and a value of emancipation. And that these values, when they're put into place along a rubric, actually make more sense as we think about how we're going to design media literacy interventions than just to say, let's bring a camera into a classroom and see if that works. And so once I lay out those values, I use them to kind of prioritize or to actualize a pathway, a set of questions, a set of constraints with which young people can use our platform to better engage and be in the world. So the book takes off from that space and then goes on to discuss different ways in which these attributes, or different cases in which some of the attributes that I mentioned have come to life, some places where they've been successful and some places where they've not been so successful. And the hope here is that this telling will help bring some of the conceptual and theoretical rigor to life. And the book ends on a note about how you can design civic media literacies at your own institution, at your own college, and I would love that to be part of a core discussion. The book is out. It really is provocative. It tries to take a larger view at early media literacy definitions and ask us, in this 21st century digital culture where rampant fake news is spread, where politicians increasingly engage in misinformation campaigns, could we have that vote go somewhere where it's more needed? Or could we have media literacy become more of a relevant and central through line in the space of digital culture. And what we need to do in through my research is to prioritize the human part of media literacy, or the civic part of media literacy, and allow the skills to support that, and not the other way around. And the book provides provocative examples and case studies and a rich glossary of terms that can help guide your experience with, hopefully with thinking through some of these media literacy attributes that I mentioned today. So that's my talk. I hope it's meaningful. I hope it's elaborate and it elicits strong thought and insight on your part. If I can do anything to help you, please let me know. I wish you a wonderful few days. And again, I wish I could be there with you. But in lieu of that, I hope that this works out for you. And I look forward to talking with many of you in the coming months and years. Thanks very much, everyone. Best of luck this week.
Asking us to challenge our definitions of traditional definitions of MIL. Alton, we might need to look at that. Yeah, so traditionally, this digital era, he says, let's look at more people engagement, because our young people cannot see beyond where they are to really question. So. Yeah, we'll talk about it afterwards, Alton. You can. So, I think what I'm going to do is I will give my talk, which I'm going to cut considerably because I also have a timekeeper who is going to be timing me as well, and then I will come back up just to give a brief introduction to my panelists, and then they will just flow accordingly, okay? So when I thought of the idea of MIL cities and the planning work that takes place to develop smart cities and how MIL, we decided to look at the planning document, or the document that the Jamaica government says it's their plan towards 2030, which should be in line with the Sustainable Development Goals of UN. So this is why my paper speaks to a smart campaign for MIL and examination of a policy planning framework for Jamaica. So I'm going to rush through. I don't want to rush through as much as we did in the previous session, because I really want us to gain some knowledge, okay? All right. So I will look at a definition that I found of smart cities and a framework. I look very briefly at the Vision 2030 Jamaica Plan, Development Plan, and then I will talk about how we interrogated the plan to see whether it did have any MIL features and whether it would really address MIL. And I may not look at all of the gaps in the plan, okay? So I found this very interesting definition of a smart city, and it really covers all that the presentation seeks to talk about, especially when we're looking at smart cities and MIL being able to address sustainability, technology, and so. It's one that achieves sustainable development and natural resource management, economic growth, improved quality of life. It fosters active participation by its citizenry, which is what I think Paul talks about, active participation of our young people. So I think in a real sense, this speaks to MIL. And you can see there's an entire paper. There's an entire paper on smart city and definitions of smart city coming out of these persons. I'll give you the full details afterwards. Okay. So some of the components of what we consider smart cities, and you can see that I won't take a long time with that because most of us are familiar with that already. But I think it forms the basis of our discussion. And socially inclusive is very, very good as well. Sustainable management and use of natural resources. And you'll understand later why I'd want to emphasize those in relation to Jamaica. Building a smart cities, and we're saying that it's in the context of the global society, in the digital age. Again, Paul refers to the whole digital age that we are in, and requires policy framework must be planned. So they don't just happen, and which is why we wanted to interrogate the planning document for Jamaica. Just to say, by the way, for those who may just be interested, I'm from the University of the West Indies in Jamaica, which is a regional institution. We are a university that covers the Caribbean, so that we have 4 campuses, one in Jamaica, one in Trinidad, and one in Barbados, and we have an open campus. You'll notice our 70th anniversary because we're actually celebrating 70 years and this year. So we are advised that all our presentations must have that 70-year celebration. So that's us, University of the West Indies. So that's a little sidebar. Okay. So this is overview. We decided to interrogate the very important planning document. It's called Vision 2030. Very in line with the Sustainable Development Goals of UN. Smart cities, we believe, are part of a developed nation. And I think for Jamaica, Jamaica intends that in 2030, they will become developed and will have smart cities. That's the plan of, that's the whole objective of the Vision 2030 plan. So it rests on 4 major goals, national goals, and you can see them. The overall aim of that is to guide the country towards achieving developed nation status by 2030, and then it will actually form the platform for building a number of smart cities throughout Jamaica. And you'll see here the national outcomes: healthy, sustainable, a healthy, stable population, world-class education, all of these things that seem like they are a part of what MIL will want to develop. And I'll run through that 3-year priorities, because every 3 years they look at priorities for the plan. What we also did was to look at the Sustainable Development Goals and align the Jamaican objectives with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And what we found was that there was need, there were some gaps in the MIL policy that we have, right, and the Sustainable Development Goals for UN. The relationship between MIL policy and building smart cities, we believe that MIL, the ability to create, store, retrieve, interpret, and critically utilize data are key MIL competencies. And we feel that with this data revolution, we should have MIL competencies integrated within the planning process and within the society. We found, and I'm going to run through this national development, the Sustainable Development Agenda for the UN, predicated on the incorporation and use of MIL. It's very, very clear that MIL must drive sustainable national development goals. So the foundation for us interrogating the Jamaican plan and the planning is that it should align with MIL if we are moving towards making smart cities. And I'll run through that. We found, though, that there are gaps in the plan. So, for example, the Sustainable Development Goals, the agenda focused on planet, people, prosperity, and we found that there were gaps in terms of sustainability. What happens on the ground in Jamaica is that it does not line up with what we would expect for an MIL smart country. And I'll just take one aspect. We found gaps in sustainability, inclusiveness, sustainable development cities, but I will just focus on just sustainability. So right now, Jamaica is still 90% dependent on fossil fuel, right? Environmental pollution is a major challenge. So if we're going back to what is expected and what we think that MIL will do, we realize that there are some gaps in our plan. And one of the things that we noticed is that there was nothing in the plan that would speak to educating the populace about how to deal with the environment. There was nothing in the plan that would speak to an engagement of MIL competencies so that the general citizenry, so we have a high-end plan, but in terms of it being on the ground with MIL competencies and driving how citizens would deal with development were not happening. And we can talk about it later, yes, because I only have a minute. And you'll see I have the plan for the Sustainable Development Goals and what we have in our agenda. So you'll see that we have like 0% in some areas, and the same thing here. The planning documents will show that we should do this, but when we go into the on the ground, what is happening in reduced communities inequalities, the percentage gets much lower. So the alignment of planning documents. And we've done that for different areas, and I won't go into but I did highlight the 3 different areas that we'd have looked at, and we found gaps. And what we realized, I'll come to almost the end, is that there should be accountability through social inclusion, and it takes an MIL competent citizen to shape a smart city and to shape the plan that we have, which is not happening. And we can talk about it afterwards if there are any questions, but I think I should end at this point. Okay. All right. Because I don't want to, I'm going to be stopping my panelists after 10 minutes. So we're now going to invite Mr. Paul Gallardo. Paul is, let me just give a little note, is a fellow in the Geddes Institute for Urban Research in Scotland. He's a designer and lawyer based in St. Louis and Buenos Aires. You're all over the place, Paul. His research examines the role of urban designers in our digitized culture. And he is going to be speaking about, well, he will talk about his presentation. Jessica, who is lined up to speak with Paul, is not here, so Paul will.
Hello, and thank you for being here, and thank you for inviting me. My talk might be a little different because I'm going to be reviewing a 2-month workshop in Buenos Aires, a graduate workshop of urban designers and architects. It included 75 students, 6 professors, and I oversaw it. Again, we explored what might be the foundations of new interfaces for our smart cities, and I began the workshop with this quote from Patrick Geddes. Patrick Geddes is considered the father of modern urbanism, and you cannot begin to evaluate, I think, where we're moving unless you go back to Geddes. Geddes starts with the perception that your goal as a designer is to, and as an urbanist, is to map the city, to create devices to continually map where we are. Okay. 2015 was the centennial of we'll call it the seminal work on cities by Geddes, and that was Cities in Evolution. I think it's extremely important to understand the relationship with Geddes and UNESCO. Patrick Geddes is a message that was sent to the future by Thomas Huxley. Thomas Huxley, of course, was Darwin's partner. Geddes was the assistant to Thomas Huxley. His ideas generated from that. And of course, the founder, not founder, but the first president of UNESCO is Julian Huxley. And there's a relationship between the ideas of sociology and urbanism. Okay, I'll have a lot of multimedia. This was the name of the workshop. In Spanish, algoritmo que se comió la calle, or the algorithm that ate the street. We made use of multiple installations on the streets of Buenos Aires to provide the students with a sense of information and its relationship to these kind of new systems. Again, I'm pulling out some of the graphics which were used in the class, which opened up the eyes to students who had absolutely no background in MIL, but are critical players in the future of designing smart cities. And so these tools were used to begin a discussion and a discourse with the students. Again, they're not taught, they don't really address issues of the cities in a kind of MIL green model. They just deal with a green model. So again, this offers these kind of tabs that you begin to hang these new ideas on. The other kind of start here is that given the current situation, we presented these projects for a smart city as a triage. That the situation is so dire, it's so dangerous right now, that we need to think of it in that extreme situation. Otherwise, we're going to stall. It's very fine to talk about these normative issues, and some of those were very are valid, and no one is diminishing them. But again, we're in a crisis situation, so the word triage is, I think, critical to any sort of smart city discourse. Okay, again, I'm going to show some of the content and the reference to what we're dealing with. This offers kind of an intro. The algorithm that ate the street examines the effect that social media bubbles and weaponized data have on urban streets. The workshop will examine how urban designers can make better use of the street and digital creatives to protect communities from the toxic aspect of social media. It's La Matanza. Matanza is a city, part of the Buenos Aires province. Buenos Aires province is, like 15 million. Matanza is 1 million. So it gives you some sort of idea, relationship to where we're working, where the university is, and the urban experience of these students. This is an example of some work. We can maybe turn it down a little. Okay, fundamentally what we were trying to do is to understand the ecology of the human brain as it relates to the city. And that they need to understand that what they're designing and what these information systems are rewiring what it is to be human. And what can they do about that? Or not what they can do about it, that they need to know that before they do anything else. We're doing a series of drawings how we might insert new interfaces, new stages into the street, visualize the street as a performative place where the ideas that make up our libraries in terms of process and in terms of hacking and making take place on the street. Just some of the work. Again, you're just trying to open the eyes to people who would otherwise be closed to the nature of these bubbles, to these ideas, so it becomes part of their embedded way of reading the city, reading the place, and reading the site. So these are kind of helpful little tools. Again, these are terms in language which they were not otherwise exposed to, which are just pushing. Clear, we all have trolls inside. Now we're laboratory animals. Okay. Again, it just opens up some of these, systems that were never thought about, never discussed in architectural classes. There was a series of bubble videos done on the streets of Buenos Aires. Those were used, again, in making a relationship between the street as a hard, embodied place and these otherwise not embodied MIL issues. We need to embody them. How do we do that? This was just an exercise in that. I'm from St. Louis. There are a number of, I could give another lecture on St. Louis. This is Marshall McLuhan. He's a critical character in the relationship of who will work with these development of these smart cities and the role of the artist, right? So we're playing with these issues now, and it's always been talked about critical thinking, no questions. That's a critical issue. But radar, it's the Geddes. Who maps? How do we map? Can we do both at the same time? I'll turn this. There were two fundamental metaphors which were used in attempting to construct this class. One is the trickster, because the trickster is a mythological figure that understands multiple levels. And urban designers in a smart city need to be able to have that trickster sensibility to read level upon level upon level upon level, all right? The second one, and I hope I have time to play it, but it's an extremely important one. I'm going to take some minute. Let's do it. Oh, I lost it. Let's go back. Okay. It may not play. Let's just read it then, if it doesn't play. It's not going to. Okay. Let's not worry about the sound. Take it too much time. Is it playing?
It was about sailing a small boat that was sucked into a gigantic whirlpool. With all hope lost, the sailor watched the currents, the vortex. He saw that some objects did not fall, but were whirled up to the surface of the sea. By studying the whirlpool and by cooperating with it, the sailor makes good his escape. But he didn't do it alone. He did it with the help of a barrel. The sailor tied himself to the barrel, and then he threw himself into the maelstrom. And around they went. But in time, the barrel and the sailor rose to the surface. He was saved.
Okay, this was metaphor number two. Metaphor number one is formative metaphor of Paco as trickster. Metaphor number two is how you build. What is the nature of the object? How do you build an object that is able to move through the maelstrom of information? What's important about this, I think, in MIL, is this was the fundamental myth that generated Marshall McLuhan. He became obsessed with the Poe story, and all his work, if you have a background in him, you can trace back to the story. All right? Sorry. Okay. Now, okay, the students got the trickster metaphor. The barrel metaphor was a little more difficult. Here's some of the students' work. You can see what they're doing right now as they kind of make this play on the excessiveness of Instagram as this kind of violent, defiling system that affects their brains. Another one, this is dealing with issues of the language and visual culture. This is the president of Argentina. Okay, I can't go through a lot of these, but the emojis replacing another sort of dimensional cognition. Here, it's classic Argentina, the iPhone, empanada iPhone, as your brain is being churned away. Again, these are visual images that keep the conversation going. And then we'll just end on this one. This is about screens. So these are students who are just creating this tableau that goes on and on and on. And to what extent this becomes a parody of the screen, and you're able to install these sorts of systems in cities which cause that level of recursive reflection among people who move through a smart city. So again, these are triage devices which need to be installed because the system is becoming, you know, more problematic all the time. I think my time is probably out, so I shall say it's done.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Paul. That was very interesting. Our next presenter, we are going to actually be Skyping him in, or is he on? And it's Michel Fontes Francesco. He's a social anthropologist, and he works at the University of Gastronomy, where he teaches and conducts research. And his presentation title is Words Are Stones, Countering Hate Speech Among Young Generations in Europe. So,
hello? This is me.
yes.
Do you hear me?
Yes,
Hello.
Michel, you are on.
Hello. Unfortunately, I cannot make it to come to the place, so I send you the presentation through a video. I hope that they can show you. Since the connection is not perfect over here, I prefer to give to the video the presentation. I'm here available for question after all. Okay. You are welcome. Thank you,
Michel,
all.
Michel.
Hello everybody, I'm Michele Francesco. I'm an anthropologist and the scientific director of the project Words Are Stones for Newton SPA. Today I'm going to speak about hate speech and present you the results of the project Words Are Stones. So, what is hate speech? When we speak about hate speech, we are talking about a problem and a phenomenon that are involving all Europe. It's a kind of offensive way of communication that is ridiculized, that is based on ridiculization of the other, mostly based on cultural biases and stereotypes. It's a problem and a phenomenon governments are finding quite difficult to stem. So this is not a new phenomenon, and it's quite common one. Let's say that 98% of Americans have witnesses some events concerning bullying or mobbing at work and at school. Only 18% of women that suffer violence consider it actually a crime and report it to the police. Most of them are keeping silent. So we are living in a quite violent environment if we consider how we speak and how we relate each other. When we speak about hate speech, we are talking about a communication that is based on cultural biases concerning affinity, confirmation, status, perception, beauty. All these elements are actually used and abused for creating communication. Hate speech became quite common and overwhelming in the very recent time, mostly thanks to the internet and the new social media. Social media breaks the limits of space and time and create a very singular dimension of communication, a dimension where everybody feels the equal of the other. Unfortunately, considering particularly how social media works, social media turns to be an echo chamber, a place where actually your idea is reinforced by sharing it with people that share your same idea, and different ideas, different perspectives are removed from the horizon. This is the basis, and this is the infrastructure that created and boosted hate speech in a recent time. All across Europe, we are talking about hate speech and how to stop this phenomenon, somehow regulating it better. That's the reason why we decided to launch the project Word of Stones. In 2017, the consortium led by ISES Association launched the project. It encompasses partners from 8 different countries in Europe. It follows the line of the annual colloquium of fundamental rights of 2015 and the prescription of the European Union concerning correct speech and communication among all the actors of the web. And it is funded by the European Union through the Right, Equality and Citizenship Program 2014-2020. It involves partners of 8 countries: Bulgaria, Greece, Italy, Lithuania, Czech Republic, Romania, Spain, and Hungary. We wanted to investigate, first of all, what was the perception of hate speech in those countries that represent quite well all the different parts of the continent and the European Union, and otherwise also to investigate how to act. First of all, the project aims at reducing hate speech, collaborating and working with young people, first of all, or practitioners such as bloggers or other people that are working in the web. In particular, we are launching a youth media campaign aimed at promoting and raise awareness among youth about the phenomenon and how to marginalize it. During the period of February-April 2018, we started the research to actually understand how the hate speech is perceived by young people and people that are working online. We launched 41 focus groups with practitioners, young people, in all the countries that are involved in the project. Overall, there are over 300 people involved in the different focus groups that gave us a good grasp of what is the situation in the countries and across Europe. You can see actually the stats in the table. Each focus group was standardized and follows the same structure decided by the project and ran for about 3 hours. What the focus groups allows us to understand? First of all, Europe is quite diverse continent, and the different countries have different situations. However, we can recognize, first of all, the similarities. Academic literature and the press suggest young generation have a good grasp of what is the internet and social media. The research suggests quite the contrary. Young people have not a clear idea of first of all, what is the actual dimension of the internet, and second of all, what is the right dimension of hate speech. It's not even clear the link between the offline and online world. Actually, the common perception is the online world is a different niche that lives standing alone from the offline world. The table gives you actually the precise perception of what are the social media used and what are actually the dimension of hate speech in the different countries. We can say that the social space, or better, the mediascape, is determined by some common elements. First of all across Europe, all the countries use more or less the same social media, and they use the social media for the same purposes. That is actually check out the other people's life and sharing the most important events of their life, or to make comments about their everyday situations. The focus group suggests that we are facing a landscape made of narration of hate. Hate speech is present everywhere. is generally based on the fragility of other people. Those fragility are linked with gender, race, religion. Very little people spoke about politics or other elements. Fragilities are used to aim their attacks to the other, to ridiculize the other, marginalize the other. If we look at the victims of hate speech, we recognize how they literally use kin, friends, neighbor, or the state to protect themselves, to ask for help. Actually, hate speech is lived as a private experience, almost completely nude. Coming to a conclusion, we can look at the commonality, and we must ask for some change. And in particular, we have to work on raise attention, raise awareness. To do that, we have to look at, first of all, education, and then move to policy revision and software change. We have to work on education, first of all, to raise awareness of what is hate speech and what hate speech actually causes. We have to address the new generation, first of all, explain them actually what are the impact of the reaction, how in the social sphere that they cultivate online actually affect dramatically the offline world. The slides allows you to go deep in the results of the research, but we can end up with two simple suggestions. We may assume young generation have a perfect understanding of what is the internet, how social media work, and how they affect their life. This is not true. Actually, it's quite the contrary. In these terms, we have to look back at education, first of all, raising awareness on what is actually the internet, how social media works, how people should behave, also in the internet sphere. Why? Because actually offline and online worlds are the same world, and what you do on the online world actually affects the offline world quite dramatically. In this respect, the research suggests that the line of action should encompass, first of all, education, raising awareness on the internet, hate speech, and its effect. Secondly, it should encompass policy revision, strengthening the penalties against hate speakers. Third, it should also encompass software change, allowing better tool to control actually what is polite and correct communication and what is just spreading hate. In this respect, we can come to a conclusion. If in the medieval times Europe was created through sharing and developing common good manners that make people behave more or less in the same way all across the continent, we have to think that we need a new etiquette shared by all the people, the user of the media sphere, so to understand and communicate in a conscious way so that actually you don't spread just hate. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Michelle. We are very fortunate on our panel to have a member of the Youth Forum, Maximo Lopez, and he is going to come to present. Maximo is actually a PhD student in library science at the Autonomous University, National Autonomous University of Mexico. So let's welcome him so that he can talk. Okay. His paper is Copyright and its Impact.
Good morning, everybody. My presentation is about information literacy and digital diversity. I think you can use the global meal in different contexts. For example, in my job, library Daniel Coseo Villegas, did a course on global media and information literacy in students of international relations. It's not enough to focus on the source of information, but how to communicate them, reviewing the alternative channels of academic productions. They improve the communication of research results. For example, this infographic about the political, immigration, and conflict in Central America. The students of international relations in-house articles relate to their own research topic. The question is how. First, identify the reference word. Second, recognize the difference between a dictionary and an encyclopedia. 3, create your own definition. Also, they learn concept to copyright, ethical use, and collaboration in collective public domain work. In videos on YouTube also. Other activities in this year is about fake news in presidential election. This year Mexico elect a new president. Society has to be well informed, so librarians work hand in hand with new space to validate phrases, data, information that presidential candidate declared in each debate. It was an incredible opportunity. We managed to position the name of the librarians and libraries and librarians as rebel monitors in front of the citizenships. Other activities is Editathon in Spanish. Is an edition marathon focused on social movement, specialty on drug traffic, stop murder, government. Wikipedia also helps to share valuable local information, making visible hidden collection, for example, classified documents and journalistic notes that have not been right, case of forced disappearance, and movement that have not so much noise in the media. Massacre of Allende. In my guild, National College of Libraries, professionalizations course on leaking data and copyright for librarians, training on the ethical use of information, how institutions should have ethical principles to avoid academic fraud, and review Creative Commons license to make their academic production visible. Finally, new chains, new realities. Focus on public libraries to improve their service and bring citizens closer to the libraries to create a strong community. Having a strategic plan for border librarians or that the response to Central American migrants. Libraries should be institutions that help eliminate inequalities in our regions. Developing a map of the key cities to provide timely information on the rights of migrants and be a security point against discrimination. All aid to migrants is valuable at the time, like the one we are living in Mexico. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Maximo, I didn't even have to give him that 5-minute signal. He was just done so quickly. Very, very interesting. So, our next presenter, and I have to tell you that the program had a Freudian slip because our presenter is Miss Supri, sing, and it's so interesting. And why I say Freudian is that she is a gender activist, right? So to have her, to call her Mr. is really not so good, right? She is a writer, a film director, a gender activist, and she has transitioned from 15 years of corporate experience to being an award-winning filmmaker and running an NGO. So let's welcome her. Okay. The film is sitting beneath.
It's very happy to have you, Supreme.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
know
you.
that you're a woman.
Thank you, thank you. I'm glad, I'm glad.
All along.
So I know I've taken you into a very grim kind of an atmosphere, but I was 5 years old when a house help took me to his personal quarters and exposed his private parts to me. I was 28 when I was sexually harassed at my workplace by my CEO. All these stories that you saw are real stories. The women are obviously symbolic. Mine is the only true story you saw. Those places are symbolic, but they are the closest to the real places where these rapes and murders happened. I always get emotional. I've made this film and it just gives me goosebumps every time I watch it. But Asifa was a 9-year-old girl who was kidnapped, sedated, kept for 8 days, raped by 6 men, including a priest, a policeman, a juvenile. And then they killed her and threw her off. Nirbhaya, I'm sure a lot of you have heard about her. She was an adult. This is the name that we all gave her because we didn't know her real name and we didn't want to talk about her real name. Her real name now is Jyoti Singh. Everyone knows about her. In 2012, she was gang raped by 6 men on a bus while she was going home. They inserted iron rods and took out her intestines from her vagina and threw her off. She succumbed to her injuries. So now every adult woman who faces sexual harassment or has been raped, she says, I'm Nirbhaya too. 50% of the world population is women and girls. And we live in cities. And if this 50% of the population has to live with the fear of being sexually harassed, I don't think we'll ever have a smart city. So I'm going to share with you something that we are doing to use media, information, and technology to create safer cities which become sustainable in the future for the generations to come. So when Nirbhaya happened, me and my partner, we started having conversations and we realized almost 90% of our own friends and family had faced sexual harassment at some stage in life. The UN says 1 in 3 women in the world has faced sexual harassment at some stage. 50% of these are under the age of 16, so they are technically child sexual harassment. 80% of these are never reported. Now, we all know why they are not reported, right? We have an ecosystem with this where the society is not very victim encouraging. There is victim blaming. There is a guilt which comes to a woman if she is harassed. Our authorities are extremely insensitive. They don't know how to deal with a woman who is a victim. They'll probably ask you questions like, oh, so where did he touch you? How did he touch you? How firm was his grip? Oh, so he hasn't raped you, so do you really want to put a report, right? Even if you end up putting a report, the judiciary takes anywhere between 5 to 10 years to bring the case to justice. So that girl, that victim who faced it probably 10 years back is facing that harassment at every point in time in a house, in the society, in judiciary, in the authorities. So like I said, this is why we don't report, right? We don't even know what sexual harassment is. If I was to ask you all, how many of you have never been sexually harassed? Raise your hands. Who have never been sexually harassed? Okay, now I'm going to tell you what sexual harassment is. These are all crimes by the law across the world. Ogling, commenting, whistling, taking pictures without permission, to rape. Every bit of it is a crime if it's not consensual. So now tell me, how many of you have never been sexually harassed in your life? So there's the sir. He's the only one. So what does this do? When you don't report, the perpetrator gets emboldened. If he has touched you today or if he's commented on you today, he's the one who's going to end up committing a crime, committing a rape, and those women will be in those pictures and those videos like the one I made, right? If you don't have reports, the authorities don't have a figure to work with. They don't have data. The problem is invisible. How do you solve a problem which is invisible? So when we did this, we realized what we wanted to do was, we wanted to bridge this gap between what was actually the reality and what was actually going to the authorities. Because unless you can make these 50% of the world population safe, I'm sorry, we'll never be a smart city. So this is what we did. We created a web app and we started inviting people to anonymously report to us any form of sexual harassment they have faced in public spaces. They only needed to say what happened, where, and when, with as much detail. But you don't need to leave any coordinates. You don't need to leave a name or a number or an email ID, right? And as soon as that happens, it gets pinned onto a map which is global. And slowly and steadily, when people start reporting, you see locational trends. So you're taking the problem away from a victim to a location which is a vulnerable spot for women or girls to get harassed. That girl who got killed and raped in that bus happened because that was an isolated area where there were no public transport, there was no lighting, no street lighting. So she had to take a private bus eventually. So these are the kind of problems which come out when you start talking about this data. So getting this data is great. We have 11,000 reports over 4 years, but how do we use it? We need to use this data. So this data is used by all stakeholders. So all of you can download the mobile app now. It's available on Android and iOS. You can use it like a TripAdvisor. So if you were coming here for the first time for a session at 9 p.m. in the night, you could see if there's ever been any case of sexual harassment right outside this road. And if yes, then you could probably tell Donata and somebody to, can you make sure that there's somebody who will take me from the hotel to this place, or you'll probably change your meeting place, or you'll be more situationally aware for your own safety. You'll make the right decisions. This data is used by communities. If a university feels that there is data where where their students are saying there's commenting and eve-teasing right outside the university, the professors can take a call the cops or call the authorities, concerned authorities, and take a call that this time, 7 to 8 p.m. when my students go home, these people stand outside, men stand outside, and they create trouble, so can we do something about it? This data is shared by the police. So we share it with 3 cities in India so far, Mumbai, Delhi, and Goa, where they actually try to change the timing of beat patrolling of their officers in areas, seeing as to what are the hotspots which are surfacing out of these reports. So we do this every month. So like I said, individuals can make better choices, communities can work better, mobilize themselves, authorities can use this data. I'm quickly going to give you an example. So how we use art and information. So information, of course, we support this work with a lot of awareness campaigns that we run, a lot of workshops that we run on sexual harassment, child sexual abuse at workplace. We are constantly trying to give out information through different means. So art is one big medium that we feel which is extremely subtle, and it's not offensive at all to anyone. Even the perpetrator probably after a point understands and he moves on. So this is a road. I'll just share this example and I'll stop. So this is a road in Delhi which joins one community which is not that privileged to the main road from where girls have to take buses and public transport to go to school or colleges, or the women need to take some form of transport to go to work. So they had a problem here. We got data that there were girls who were complaining that there are men who stand there. In the evenings they touch and grope, in the daytime they comment and they whistle. So we went to the community and we started the conversation, and one of them stood up, and then we realized that the whole Pandora box opened, right? Everyone started saying, I have faced this, my friend faces it, my sister faces it, mother faces it. So we said, what do you want to do? So they said, can we pass on a message to these men that this is not right, and now that you're saying it's a crime, there's a law, they can be punished, can we tell them? So they painted, we got a painter who taught the girls of the community how to paint the wall. They spent 3 days, they painted the wall with eyes. They wrote messages like, speak up, look from your heart, not from your eyes. The relentless gaze, I'm not going to stop. So a lot of it is in Hindi, which you will probably not understand. But that is one of the community girls who stood up first and actually said that she has faced it. So what has happened is, on one side of the wall is this, and one side is all the Indian penal codes, which say that this is this punishment by the law. And very soon enough, the person who was standing opposite where the boys would come and stand and drink coffee and have a smoke, he started telling the men to move on, look at the wall, read it, and move on. It's been 3.5 years, and we've not got a single complaint of sexual harassment from there. And I think I'll close with this. These are more things, but we can leave this. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I wanted to open up, and so not that I wanted to stop you because it was very moving and very interesting, but I wanted to give persons opportunities if they had questions, and then in the break, I think there are persons who will want to talk. So our session, we have looked at issues of mistrust. We have looked at gaps in planning for MIL, so that at the root of what we do, are we really making? We've looked at safe cities, libraries as spaces in cities. We've looked at mapping of cities. We've looked at hate speech. And so I open the floor. We have a few minutes for questions. Yes, sure, please come on. I'll just stand, yeah. No, I'll stand here. Because I may have to walk around with the, yeah. And we also have, right, we also have, it's not Michelle, it is, It's Michelle. We have Michelle online, right? Yeah, I think so. Yes. Sorry. So, questions, burning questions. Yes.
I have a question for you. It's not very radical, your vision of new technologies and communication. Is, for example, the hard and dark internet, and another angles, another visions. That's my question.
Well, I mean, basically, it's an interface design. It's trying to create new structures within the city where I think the best example would be what you did with those painters. That we basically would have, in fact, I couldn't go into it, these kind of mobile systems that would move through a city, which would have this ongoing creative discourse that would remix these the various legislations, the crimes, and the images. And so it is simply creating a machine that allows this critique and recursion to be agile and to move, and to have the backup of designers and programmers who are quick and able to put together these sorts of problems. So these ideas could move throughout the streets of Delhi or Mumbai.
They can, and I think when you're giving the ownership of your city to the citizens, I think that's the biggest thing. That's where you'll start solving the problems, because you can't leave everything on the government. I think we all need to take ownership as well.
That's one of the things I found in even looking at the plan, is that we still have fishermen who are going after the fish in Jamaica that are they're not supposed to be. Because even though we talk about this safe environment, the citizens don't understand. So we need to get it to their level so that they're owning what we are talking about as smart cities. Yeah.
Okay. I think my question goes to Michelle. Now, this issue of hate speech is contentious, is controversial, because it has to do with cultural issues. What is hate speech in some clan is not hate speech in another clan. And for instance, in my own country, the president right now, there was a time he was contesting, and then somebody said, this man is old, he doesn't have good health, and I was sure that he's going to lead us very well. And it was considered as an hate speech. Now, I don't see hate speech in that, because this is freedom of expression. That person was just expressing his concern. So, Mitchell, my question is, how do you come about universal definition of hate speech that will be acceptable to everybody? That is one. Secondly, in your slide, you mentioned about a software issue where you can censor hate speech. For me, I think that would be an avenue where you can be, where censorship will actually limit freedom of expression and the right to hold opinion. Because by the time you are censoring, you censor hate speech based on your knowledge that this is hate speech, and the person that is expressing that might not actually meant to have hate speech, but was just producing a concern. So by censoring such speech, you'll have denied the society of hearing alternative narratives and a genuine concern when it comes to issues that are germane to them. So I'm concerned about this. I don't know what you have to say about this.
Okay, good point. The very point of hate speech is quite new phenomena, since social media in particular are new. Despite that, the fact that we are actually speaking, talking, referring to the world not in what we can call a polite way is not something new. The problem is people do not recognize that what you do online is affecting the life of people also offline. This is the very problem, the social problem. I don't ask for censorship. I ask for more awareness and more education, that is literacy. That's also the reason we present the paper over here. What we have seen around Europe is first of all, the problem is common and shared across the countries. Second, depending on the sensibilities and the histories of the different countries, we are asking for different solutions. In some countries, it's more about education. In some countries, it's more about the state intervention. I don't like the idea that the only way of resolving the problem is to censor the way people speak, because actually it's not a solution. Is a way of hiding the problem. And the problem is linked with also the paper of the other speaker, is about how we relate with the other, how we understand the other, and what kind of space we create for the others. This is I don't know if I answered to your question actually. But I think that is a way of approaching what is happening now.
Thank you. I have a question for Michele and for Mr. Singh. Michele, I'm sorry, hate speech is not a new phenomenon. It's maybe new phenomenon in the countries, some of the countries you work with, because the Balkan Wars 25 years ago was very much about hate speech, just to use Europe as an example, but other continents. My question for Michele is, do you talk to those who produce hate speech, particularly those who have very high political positions? Take care of Hungary and President of Hungary. He is the hate speech monger, and the European Union is doing nothing almost to stop him. So are you doing something through your project with the hate mongers producers? And the question for Miss now, Suprit. I can spot the more I come to MIL conferences, a deeper and deeper gap between the theoreticians of MIL and the practitioners. And I come from an organization which has been operating in this field for 20 years. And I was told yesterday that we are not MIL organization. Okay, fine with me. Do you consider yourself as your organization as MIL organization? Since you're using media for such an important and tragic events. So would you feel offended if someone says you are not a MIL organization?
Shall I answer that first? Yeah, okay. So, okay.
I agree with you. Hello? Do you hear me? Okay, sorry. I agree with you. Hate speech is nothing new. It's new, the media saw the effect and the space of this event. Concerning the project, World Response is mostly focused on youth rather than, let's say, adults. Or in that sense, we spoke with young people that are actually involved in the phenomena. Try to understand why they are approaching the communication.
My turn? Okay, I get some time. Okay, all right. So, so as practitioners, I know you said that some are researchers and then some are practitioners. So as practitioners, as somebody who has gone through something which I'm working on, we don't have time to feel offended about anything. It just doesn't matter to me. People call me feminist, they don't call me feminist, I don't care. I will continue doing what I'm doing. And honestly, it doesn't hurt me, it doesn't matter to me. I'm here today, this is my first MIL. And I think we are very, very happy that we are here and that we can share something that we are doing which might in the future become part of a lot of your countries. We are there in 10 countries so far. So no, we don't even go into that conversation actually. We don't think about it.
Thank you. My questions is addressed to Mrs. Paulette. I want to ask if there is a link between the system of governance in a country and...
He can't hear you. Can you be louder, please?
My question is there is if there is a link between the system of governance in a country and the possibility of building a smart city. Maybe the question should be wide, but we see that around the world, there are some countries that are democratic, but they are not, there's a lot of cities within this country that are not really smart. And there are countries that can be considered as dictatorships, but you see that citizens in cities are exchanging, and it is maybe, so there are different levels. So I wanted to know if the system of governance can influence how to build a smart city and so on. Thank you.
Is this for, you want for me? Oh, okay,
yes.
Paulette.
Thank you.
Yeah, we weren't sure, I wasn't sure. Okay, I have to tell you that Jamaica is a democratic society. However, what we have found is that policy doesn't always drive a lot of what happens. So the government is probably meeting and making a lot of policies, and yet these policies don't drive down to what happens on the ground. So we don't have cities in Jamaica that may be considered non-democratic. Everywhere is, but it's not getting down. In the same way, just recently, Paulette Stewart and I, we did a research looking at MIL in schools. And what we found is that the government there's no policy on MIL. So everybody's just doing their own thing because they have not gotten to touch the ground as to the practice. And again, that gap between the theory and the practice, and that's what we found in just that small study that I did, looking at the plan. You see, there is this big thing up there that says by 2030 we will get to this, but the reality is that it is not happening. It's not reaching the citizens. So it has little to do with democracy, but it has to do with how planning takes place at the higher levels, and it doesn't reach, it doesn't get to the ground. And I think if we're talking about smart cities, we're talking about MIL cities, then it has to be on the ground. It needs to reach the citizens. People have to understand what a smart city is all about. The environment. If it's just from a policy perspective, it's not going to make any difference. And that's what we found in just interrogating that policy document. Yeah. Yes, you can add, yes, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I agree with Colette, but also in some stages, like we are trying to propagate that educating our boys is very important so that our girls can be saved. Right? So having sex education and gender sensitivity in school from a younger age is extremely important. We are doing it very sporadically with schools and colleges, but if we can get it into the education system of our countries, I think that is going to be a more sustainable solution for us to not have this problem 20 years from now. So maybe that way the policy can help, but it has to be all the levels together. Ground has to be worked first. That I agree with.
Yes.
I mean, one of the critical issues of an interface, new interface system, is you're creating these agile agitprop platforms. And an agile platform is not like putting in a big screen TV in a public plaza, which is controlled, which can be monitored. So the idea behind all of these new systems, these new mapping devices, is that you're not going to be fixed in one place. So an autocratic, tyranny is going to be much more threatened by this sort of infrastructure that begins to remix and use stories in a different fashion. So these ideas in terms of a smart city and this new kind of developing infrastructure clearly are controlled and defined by the nature of the governance and the democracy.
I think, yes, Alton has, but I think we wanted to just get that last comment from you. Oh, wait for you. Oh, I didn't realize that we talked so much.
What a time to recognize that you're way over time before you bring the mic to me. Anyway, I'll be very short. So, Supreet, you're not here by accident, as you know. Your abstract was read, all right. I happen to be a gender focal point in UNESCO, all right. We're sorry for the error, and I'd just like to introduce everyone. It's probably difficult for you. If we can just stand and recognize the strength in this woman, all right. Can we just stand to recognize the strength in this woman? That sounds a little bit weak, though. Now, on the question of who is a male organization or what organization is not a male organization, in fact, this is the main purpose of the theme of this year's Global MIL Week. It's male cities. It's not just speaking to the traditional male experts, all right? And this is a part of the strategy of UNESCO and the strategies of our partners who are hosting this conference, that we want to move outside of speaking to the converted. You heard many times over the last day that media and information literacy is not important because in and of itself. It's what we do with literacy. It's what we do with our media and information literacy competencies. And the application of MIL to promote gender equality is important. The application of MIL to promote safety of journalists or quality media is also relevant. And so if you read the message from UNESCO in the beginning of the program, it says one family for MIL. And that's what we are. And then finally, on the point of the definition from the keynote speaker to redefine MIL, for UNESCO, we chose not to give a definition of MIL because it's not easy to contain the complexities of what MIL is in 3 sentences. And so what we focus on is the key learning outcomes of MIL, the key competencies of MIL. And those competencies, as described by UNESCO in all our material, they were, how do I say, they were futuristic. They were looking ahead of the time, and it wasn't the traditional description of MIL that was held. It wasn't just about criticizing media and distrusting everything. It was about critical engagement. It was about civic engagement, and it was about the positive dimension of MIL. MIL for social inclusion, MIL to promote sustainable development goals, and these positive issues, not just looking at the social challenges, but looking at the social opportunities and how MIL can help us to realize those opportunities. I wish I had more time, but I'll stop.
Michelle, did you have any burning points that you wanted to say? Because you got disconnected. Just maybe a minute? Just a minute?
Thank you so much. I'm sorry for disconnection. As I said, for answering, I don't think it's something new what we are doing. Actually, it's just changing our form of living together. I agree with the last comment about rather than give a definition, is important to look at the outcome. And I think that all of us share the same idea of a humanity that is able to accept the others. This is something that is not, unfortunately, happening. That's all. Thank you.
So I think on that note, I just want to say thanks to you all for being a part of the very important discussion about MIL cities and smart cities, and to thank all the panelists, including our keynote speaker who sent his, and I think Alton, it wasn't so much about a complete redefinition of MIL. I think to look at aspects to make it more relevant, he says, because issues of mistrust is very hard to incorporate. So it's not so much a full definition he was asking for redefinition. our keynote speaker. So I just want to thank our panelists and our keynote speaker and all of you. Thank you so much. Please give the panelists another round of applause.